All the rolling go, where am I to go? Meet Johnny, where am I to go? For I'm a young and a sailor lad, and where am I to go?
Hello, and welcome to Where Am I to Go podcast. Today we are in Hot Springs, Arkansas. And this is a really cool town. We drove around a little bit today. There's lots of old shops, and it appears to be tons and tons and tons of history in this place. And today we're with Robert, who is going to be our guide through the Gangster Museum. I have a feeling that we're going to learn a little bit about gangsters, and I have a feeling we're going to learn a whole lot more about Hot Springs, Arkansas. Welcome, Robert, to Where Am I to Go podcast.
Thank you. Appreciate you guys coming down. Got a beautiful day, 65 degrees, sunny. We hadn't had that this year yet. We've had it the last couple of days, though. I think we got pretty good weather until Friday.
Well, and we're still early in spring. The podcast probably won't come out till late summer, so I don't want to give people the wrong idea that it's 65 degrees and this
Not
is a
all
place
the time.
to escape
No,
the heat.
We do hit 100 occasionally, but all in all, the mountains kind of insulate us a little bit, and there's enough water here, lots of water. There's enough water here to kind of keep things cool down.
But it's hot water.
Well, there are 600 springs here. 49 of them are capped, some of the better hot water springs, and the rest of them just flow freely down into Hot Springs Creek, which is below Central Avenue, and a lot of those are cold water springs. But generally, it's most of the springs are hot water, thermal water.
Okay, and they run underneath the street where everybody's driving.
Underneath it, yeah, well, everybody's driving on top, and all the water, and it's year-round water. You can hear it running when you cross any of the streets that run into Central Avenue. You can hear it running constantly, even during droughts, and it's a pretty good flow of water. I mean, we've always got water here.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, and they had a lot of bathhouses and that kind of stuff back in the day?
They did. You know, originally it was a sacred ground for a lot of Indian tribes. They'd travel great distances to get here. Of course, the Cherokees were just over in Oklahoma, but we had the Caddos and the Quapaws here. And once they got here, there were open pools of hot and cold water downtown here in what is now the National Park. And they just lay down their spears and their bows and arrows, and everybody got along, and it's been like that for hundreds of years. It's just always kind of remained sacred like that, all the way, at least through some of the tumultuous times where we'd have Bugs Moran and Capone here at the same time, but nobody got it on.
Wow.
There was a lot of other things to do and have fun with. Mostly women, whiskey, and gambling that would keep them busy. So the guns were not part of it.
Okay. And so this was a hangout for all of the gangsters, and that's the reason that the Gangster Museum is here in Hot Springs?
That's right. I thought about a lot of places to put it, but this was the only place that we could put it where all of them came here, but they were never in trouble here. Other than Lucky Luciano being arrested here, we actually arrested him for a traffic violation and were able to hold on to him for a couple of weeks. But the Attorney General of New York, finally, Thomas Dewey, came down and got him because they realized he didn't have a vehicle here. So, but his cell was open, and his girlfriend, Gay Orlova, was here with him. So they took him back, took him to Florida. But this is where they spotted him walking on the federal property over there. So they were able to talk governors and senators into having us pick him up. But he was fine here. He liked it. As you took the tour, I guess you saw Ed Atwater, who met him.
Right.
Ed was 95. He's passed away now. He was 95 when we shot that video in there. So.
And now he was the guy that was the
bell captain of the Arlington.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now let's talk a little bit more about that. You mentioned that you've got the state side and the federal side.
Right.
And that's divided right down Central Street.
Right, exactly. The National Park is where the bathhouses are, even though the Arlington has its own bathhouse, and the Jack Tar around the corner on Park Avenue, it's now senior living. It it had a bath. That was the longest run. Frank Costello owned the Jack Tar Hotel. And the state owns the street that covers up Hot Springs Creek. The feds are over there on the east side, and the city owns the west side, so a lot of people have got to agree on anything that happens here.
That sounds pretty rough.
So we don't ask much, and we just kind of meander through life, I guess you'd call it, here in Hot Springs. But Hot Springs has had some massive floods. 1,000 buildings burned back in 1914, 1915.
Wow.
And I say in my book, Hot Springs from Capone to Costello, it really didn't matter what happened here. They just mopped up and marched on. Jesse and Frank James robbed a stagecoach out just west of town here. And years later, Frank James opened up a shooting arcade here and got along just fine until he himself got robbed.
Wow.
Jesse was gone by then. But Hot Springs is so fascinating. I mean, when you get through, the James brothers and Bat Masterson and Wyatt Earp and those guys that would come here for the thermal water.
Right.
Charles Bassett, who owned the first owner of the Long Branch Saloon in Dodge City, he's actually buried here. But once you get past those guys and you get to the 1920s, then it started getting exciting because in 1931, let's just compare it to Las Vegas. I've spoke at the Mob Museum a couple times, but in 1931, Las Vegas had 5,000 people staying there, not living, staying there, building the Boulder Dam, which became the Hoover Dam. And they had no hotels; they were cabins for the workers. On Lake Mead. In 1931, Hot Springs had 20,500 people in it, 22 high-rise hotels, gambling, although it was illegal, to the tune of about 50 million back in the middle of the century. But because everybody, including the powers that controlled the state, all made money off of it, it all just worked just fine. So, people ask me today, where are all these old gangsters? And I said, well, of course they're in Congress now. They don't have to follow anything. They got their own laws, just like the mob did.
We won't bring up the fact that Bill Clinton spent most of his youth here.
Well, he learned from the masters, I'll tell you. If you in the 20s, late 20s, 25 to 30, let's say, when Capone was here with the outfit, and Moran and Vincent Drusi and all of them, Capone had the entire outfit staying in the Arlington, would rent the entire fourth floor. When those guys were here, they had a lot of money compared to other folks that were here taking baths, and they shared it. They big tippers, dress nice, very polite. I mean, you wouldn't find anybody in this town. I've seen a lot of written postcards from those days, and you just don't find any of them where anybody said anything bad about the mob. They were the nicest guy, and having met through this a lot of children and grandchildren, let's say Ben Siegel and Capone and Meyer Lansky, they went to church on Sundays. They taught their kids how to ride bikes. They taught them how to swim. Very normal home life. It's just their business was a little stranger than most of ours.
Yeah, I would say. And now you brought up the Arlington Hotel.
Right.
And talk a little bit about the Arlington. You'd kind of told us a little bit. My experience is when I first came into Hot Springs, I looked up and there was this massive building.
Yeah.
It's not a small building. This thing's what, 8 stories, 10 stories
11
tall?
stories, and it's the largest hotel room-wise in Arkansas still today, and it's always been the flagship hotel of Arkansas. it had one set of owners for a long time, and we've had an ownership change about 5 or 6 years ago, I guess it was, and they're working on the outside, have started remodeling some of the inside. They're having to modernize it, which goes against my grain a little bit, but the Southern Building Code makes them do that, you know.
Right.
So, but that's pretty much where everybody stayed.
Now, when you
the
say
mob, and I mean Elizabeth Taylor and Mickey Hilton stayed there. I mean, that's where the movie stars and the celebrities, the rich, the famous, and the notorious stayed at the Arlington.
And you also mentioned that FDR stayed there.
FDR stayed there.
Kennedy stayed there.
Yeah. Truman stayed there. Eisenhower stayed there. Who else? Ronald Reagan stayed there. We got pictures of Ronald Reagan.
It's amazing that all those guys find Hot Springs to be such a place to come to, such a magnet.
Teddy Roosevelt stayed there because his best friend was a guy named John Greenway, who discovered a little mineral out in Arizona called copper.
Okay.
And he was with Teddy Roosevelt in the Rough Rider expeditions. And he was from Hot Springs, and Greenway and Roosevelt, interesting thing about that, both Roosevelts were there, and FDR was there at the same time Babe Ruth, because this is the birthplace of Major League Spring Training baseball.
And we're going to get into that in one of your galleries here.
So you had FDR, Babe Ruth, the Chicago outfit with Capone and Gusick and Frank Nitti, all sitting in the Arlington lobby, reading racing forms, smoking cigars, having a little drink in the morning, take off the edge, and nobody said anything about it. They were all kind of just businessmen in different businesses.
Isn't that unbelievable?
Yeah.
Just fascinating.
So, yeah.
Well, Robert, let's take a look at your museum.
Gallery.
And as you come into this place, he's got a nice little gift shop. You pay at the front desk, and the first thing you'll notice is a safe door that says Arkansas Bank and Trust. This is the entrance to this museum. It is such a cool way to enter. You come through a walkway, there's a fountain, and you can probably hear the water trickling in the background. And we come into the Power Brokers Gallery. Now, each one of these galleries, as we go through, has a video that describes a lot of the different things that were happening. You've talked to people that were here when activity was happening, and I found all of the videos very interesting. They're all very tolerable as far as length of time. They're all, 5 or 6 minutes long is all.
Right.
But it covers a lot of ground in that 5 or 6 minutes. But now we're in the Power Brokers.
Well, I thought it was really interesting when I first started researching this story that all of this could start happening in the 20s, and where was the law? Where was the normal things that keep that kind of thing from happening?
Where were they?
They were in on it. So, we had a mayor that lasted for 20 years. Gambling was illegal, but they figured out if they just split the profit with everybody above them. And back then, states had a lot more autonomy. They weren't controlled by the federal government.
Right.
I mean, it was just what you did in your state was your business, really.
Now, was the national park over there at that point in time?
As long as you didn't do anything over there, you were okay. The national park, the national park was part of the Louisiana Purchase.
Okay.
Was what most congressmen told Thomas Jefferson that was the worst thing he had ever done. Of course, it created Arkansas and all the way up to, Minnesota.
And everywhere.
So Hot Springs was part of that, and this land, what they called this is a reservation, not an Indian reservation. It was reserved for recreational activity by the federal government.
Okay, now was this before?
The very first one.
This is the very first one.
Yeah, so they didn't have a national park system, so it wasn't called a national park. But when they threw out the commemorative quarters about 8 years ago
Right.
for the national parks. This was number one. This was the first place the Department of Interior handed out quarters, and it said Hot Springs National Park number
Right.
one. But it was really named number 15, I think. But this was the first land that Hunter and Dunbar and Lewis and Clark came to, coming up the Mississippi from the Gulf, from New Orleans.
Okay.
And it had hot water, and that was something that, you know, they'd never seen before, really, unless they boiled it over a fire. And there were signs that Hernando de Soto had been here, and because he had a nom de plume, they call it, a writer with him on the travels in search of the Fountain of Youth. He thought he had found it here.
Okay.
And they just wrote about the territories that they took to get here, and it just kind of sounded like they were describing Hot Springs, where Hot Springs is now.
Right.
Originally, it was called Thermopolis.
That's where I live.
Yeah.
Thermopolis, Wyoming.
Well, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
That's crazy, because this town was called Thermopolis.
Really?
Back in the way back, and before they changed it to Hot Springs.
Okay.
So it was just interesting. And then, you know, the federal government got involved when so many people were coming here to get in these hot pools, and they thought it would help them. And indeed, even today, hundreds of years later, I don't think they make as big a deal as they should about the thermal water, because we have people here, of course the Buckstaff Bathhouse is right across the street, who come over here while their loved one or spouse, not that their spouse isn't a loved one, but is over there taking a baths, and they come every quarter.
Okay.
A lot of them from Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, or these surrounding states. And they at least claim they have just gotten rid of their arthritis medicine as long as they come every quarter and take a regimen, what they call a regimen of baths. That's 3 days in a row,
Okay.
a couple of different times a day of the thermal water. So, I mean, you know, it's interesting, and the water is not, it's not like volcanic out of the
Right.
center of the earth or anything. You know, it's a molecular thing where it's coming through a small aperture and colliding these molecules together, and that's what heats it up, is the
Okay.
actual elements that are involved in the water.
Really?
And we have a lot of cancer doctors that come here and fill up jugs. You know, I don't know. I don't know where to go with that, other than I just have to believe it, because I talk to the people who get in it.
Right.
I mean, it feels good, no doubt about that. It's pretty relaxing.
Is it real rich in minerals?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So it's-
And all of the fountains around town or downtown here, they give you the mix of the minerals that are in that particular stream, that
Okay.
particular spring. So, like the one over on Whittington Avenue is pretty heavy in manganese, and I don't know. It seems like the leading element in that legend, that key there that they show. And that's where a lot of cancer doctors fill up, you know, truckloads of water to
Okay.
take back to their clinics and stuff.
Huh.
Not just from here, I mean from all over the state. So it's interesting, and it's good tasting water. I mean, it's delicious, you know. Our gangster water is what we call it.
Okay.
It's mined out at Mountain Valley, and of course we have Mountain Valley water here. This is the birthplace of Mountain Valley water.
We're going to talk a little bit about that as we get
And
into
you're right,
another
yeah,
go.
you ought to go down and visit their shop there. And Mountain Valley water, Secretariat drank, and Man of War
Oh, both of them.
drank Mountain Valley water.
Okay.
A lot of overachievers, I think I put it in my book, drank Mountain Valley water.
Okay.
And of course, a lot of presidents took Mountain Valley water back, you know, to D.C. when they'd leave here. They'd take it with them, and that's how they were introduced to it. So, Mountain Valley has a great history. A different family owns it now, but a big corporation owns it. But
Okay.
still, it's fascinating. But the Power Brokers galleries, these pictures in here are all pictures from the turn of the century, and as you guys know, all of these buildings are still here.
Right. Yes.
It's amazing. There's the Arlington, what we call the New Arlington, opened in 1925. And there's the article of the New York Times front page that talks about it reopening, and a lot of New Yorkers came here. And really, that they considered Hot Springs America's first resort. That's not like an ad campaign that we put together.
Okay.
That was done back in the turn of the century, 1900s. And I think it was the New York Times that first said it, that this was America's first resort, because people just came here to relax. And back in those days, there weren't any freeways. You were traveling here most of the time by train, stagecoach in the early days, and there was one way in and one way out. So it kind of became a cosmopolitan hole in the wall for ne'er-do-wells. But when they were here, they were quite respectable, you know.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And so was there pretty good payoffs for all of your elected officials that turned a blind eye?
Oh, yeah. Well, the governor built a multi-million-dollar home in Huntsville, Arkansas, and he made $14,000 a year from the state.
Doesn't sound anything like the
that's one of those
politicians
go
of today,
figure.
huh?
So when you leave the Power Brokers Gallery, you'll come into a gentleman retired here, an English gentleman named Owen Vincent Madden. He retired here, came here in 32, then he had to go back to New York for a parole violation they trumped up, but eventually they let him out after 9 months again, and he came back here and he married the postmaster's daughter here and lived the rest of his life here. He owned the Cotton Club, the Stork Club, the Phoenix Brewery, Phoenix Cereal Beverage Company, what they called it during Prohibition, never stopped making beer. And you'll see when we get into Capone's gallery that you could always get alcohol, even during Prohibition. You just had to have a prescription for it, similar to what Arkansas has now with marijuana.
Or they have with all your prescription drugs that...
Sure. Yeah. As long as the government, this is one thing I noticed about Hot Springs. I don't know that they're the model, because I'm sure it was going on everywhere. But if you can figure out a way the federal government can make money off whatever you're doing, they'll figure out a way to allow it to happen.
Right.
So, I mean, that's just the
You
bottom
just have
line.
to be one of the lucky guys that's in cahoots.
Right.
Now,
Madden, because he owned so many clubs and owned pretty much New York, he owned the political system in New York. When he got here, he became the architect of how to run this gambling where everybody was making money. The city was going to be making money. The gambling commissions were going to be making money. Run fair games. Some of the people will make money. Shoot some of it upstream. Just anything that could get in the way of commerce. Figure out a way like water to get around it.
okay.
For instance, we had a group of churches and preachers basically that didn't like what was going on downtown here, and were kind of raising hell about it, so to speak. Well, his idea of had the gambling house owners, come together in what we call a businessman league meeting. And he thought it'd be best if you take 10% of all the profit every Saturday night and donate it to the churches as a tithe Sunday morning.
That sounds reasonable.
And things got quiet. And that went on for 40 years. So there's always a way.
There's always a way.
Where there's a will, there's a way.
Okay.
You know, some of these other guys, they would have just tried to start roughhousing.
Right.
Said that, there's a better way than using a gun. Use the billfold.
Right.
That's the way to do it.
And now Owen Madden, I've never heard of him before.
Most people hadn't. I'm doing a documentary on him this summer with Kevin Costner's team, Mark Gillard and Glenn Klakowski and I. And that'll probably enlighten a lot of people to this guy, but he was a big-time mentor to Luciano, the Capones. The Capones were from New York. Al only went to Chicago to work for Johnny Torrio, and that's how he became famous. And he first came here because Johnny Torrio and his wife came here with little Al Capone as their steward, coming with them.
Okay.
And he wanted to move here. Torio wanted to retire here, which a lot of people did, and just couldn't find the right fit. And you know, a lot of they didn't really want people from other areas coming in here that had some power and knew how to do things, because you know, it would take away some of their power.
Right.
So they just made it really hard for Johnny. And so anyway, they went back to Chicago, no harm, no foul. And they'd still visit here during the spring when races were running. We have Oaklawn Park and thoroughbred racetrack. But that was Capone's introduction to Hot Springs, is with the Torios.
Okay.
And then he just made it a pilgrimage after that. And when he took over the outfit, you know, this was a regular spring thing. Well, at least according to Deirdre Capone, his grandniece, Ralph Capone's granddaughter.
Okay.
Who's on one of our video presentations.
Okay.
So, and Meyer Lansky said the same thing. Meyer Lansky would come down here a lot. We had still have a Jewish hospital here, Levi Hospital. And back in the, you know, the middle of the last century, Jewish folks couldn't have access that some of the rest of us did because they were Jewish.
Right.
But they could here, because all bets from around the country were off when you came here.
That is so interesting.
And so they could, Meyer's son, Buddy Lansky, had cerebral palsy. He could get help over and the baths helped him. So he could get help over at the Levi Hospital. And so he constantly, and of course he was close friends with Madden because of their New York connection. And so there's just a lot of reasons for those guys, the New York and Chicago people, to come here, the mob, to come here. And people didn't get all bent out of shape about it. They, you know.
Well, they treated the people here really good from one of the videos that we were seeing.
Sure.
And like you said earlier, the money just kind of flowed. They were good tippers and
right.
Spent a lot of money here.
Yeah,
also.
I mean, it's been just a tourism place for, I guess, 100 years at least.
Wow.
Know? So I figured 2023, from 1923 to 2023, before that, you know, it was horse and buggies and Indians still roaming around, but it was even a tourism place for them too.
Right.
I mean, it was just a place where hospitality was the name of the game. And kind of, I don't know, the lesson I learned from this research was, if you're nice to people, generally they're nice back to you.
You know,
it doesn't
I think
matter what their work is.
I think that's across the board.
Yeah.
Like I said, we're from Wyoming, where Butch Cassidy and those guys were. Everybody really liked them. You know, they had refuge in a lot of the ranch houses and that type of stuff, because they'd drop in and give the kids a 50-cent piece, which was a lot of money at that time, and they would feed the outlaws, and they had refuge in a lot of places just because the way that they treated people on the way.
Yeah. So it's a reciprocal thing.
Right.
And we still do that today here. I mean, people go out of their way to help each other, and we go out of our way to help them. And so it's just a cool place to be, really.
Okay, and now in this room, you've got lots of pictures of Madden and different people that he associated with, movie stars and all of that.
Oh, yeah.
You've got a display case here that has a little Derringer, a couple of revolvers, a semi-auto gun. You've got some pictures, some documents, registration cards.
That's his citizenship card there.
Okay.
He was in business with Joe Kennedy and Frank Costello in the House of Lords over in Scotland. So they brought King's Ransom over here to the United States, which has been on, King's Ransom has been on every peace treaty signing that the United States has done.
And now that's a whiskey.
That's a whiskey.
Right.
And that bottle is, I think, valued at about $7,500. It's never been opened, so it's probably, I think it's probably almost 100 years old.
Wow.
Then we've got, of course, medicinal whiskey, which is what you would buy from the government. That brewery, that distillery is still in business. Sunday morning just had a special on CBS Sunday morning. They distilled that out of Tennessee, and they still don't do that, but they make several whiskeys that they're filled by and bottled by other people. And I've tasted medicinal whiskey before. It's very good.
Is it?
Yeah, it's one blind taste test over Chevets and all kinds of different whiskeys.
But only for medicinal purposes.
That's right, which is why our grandparents, at least mine, I'm 71, my grandfather would have, what I learned now is a shot glass, and he just called it his medicine. But if you think about it, in his day and time, it was medicine.
Right.
You had to have a prescription for it. So, I mean, how bizarre is that? It was medicine. After I learned, I thought, oh, that's not his medicine. That's just a shot of whiskey. But now that I'm doing this, I see it really was medicine.
Yeah.
You had to have a prescription for it. So anyway, it's funny, and that just stuck with everybody. So, just more fascinating history. We had a lot of moonshining here, and we'll get into that in the next gallery.
Okay, well, let's head to that gallery.
Yeah. Of course, there's Mae West. She was Madden's manager while he spent his time in Sing Sing.
Okay, now as we go between these different galleries, you walk through some tunnel type
This is an interesting
areas.
phone book here, Warren, because this came out of the Arlington,
Okay.
and on the side of it is Clinton Buick.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yep, I see it. There's a sticker right there.
Yeah.
Now, how was that related
That was
to?
Bill Clinton's uncle.
That was Bill Clinton's
And
uncle.
he was one of the GIs that came back after the Second World War, got rid of McLaughlin, but then they had 12 McLaughlins.
Okay.
All doing the same thing. So then you'll come into the Capone Gallery. A lot of these photos are photos from the Capone family. And, we also have a Prohibition exhibition
Right.
here.
And with your Prohibition exhibition, you've got a still, you've got a couple of whiskey kegs.
Right.
You've got several old bottles.
Yeah. Now, the interesting thing about this Mountain Valley bottle, because Mountain Valley bottles usually read Mountain Valley as they're sitting on a dispenser.
Okay.
This one reads on its base.
Okay.
That's how they could tell on the trains and the trucks. Mountain Valley had its own rail car system.
Okay.
And so they could ship this all over the country, and it looked clear because it's made with mineral water. It looked just like water.
Okay.
But the only way the people who unloading it knew which bottles were whiskey is if it read Mountain Valley that way, it was moonshine, clear. And if it read on a dispenser, in other words, it'd look upside down in that situation there,
Right.
then it was water. And they shipped it all over the country. I think somewhere in this room there's a map that shows where all their rail cars went. I know it's in my book.
Well, that had to have been a heck of a deal for them selling water when they weren't selling whiskey also.
Yeah, well, it worked both
advertisement.
ways. It allowed people who were bootlegging in Chicago and New York to cut their product with moonshine and stretch it. So, it was just commerce. It's just, as Capone once said, I'm just a businessman. I just supply a demand.
Right.
So, that's the way he looked at it, and I guess you can still look at it like that. But
over here on this wall, you've got a picture of a Cadillac.
that's the Capone Cadillac. I had it for a couple of years in the Arlington lobby. 9,850 pounds, armored, bulletproof glass, and John O'Quinn had donated it to us to kind of commemorate our grand opening back in 2008.
Oh, really?
And he was a big-time attorney in Texas, and so I didn't have a place to put it in the small building we were in. So the Arlington was gracious enough to take the doors off and let us drive it into the lobby. And
Really?
It sat there. It was just
You
magnificent.
drove it into the lobby.
Yeah, it drives. Yeah, I still have video of us driving it, and it was a fascinating vehicle, and it went on the auction block after John died, and I got up to some amount on it, and then somebody just upped me $100 grand. Meekum did the auction, and the guy on the phone said, "You want to match it or go up?" I said, "No, I'm afraid if I go any higher, I'll have friends I don't need." Probably now I would have definitely have gone up,
Right.
But it disappeared, and whoever bought it, they won't tell you who bought it. I was number 2. And I just told them, I said, well, email the party, and if they ever get ready to sell it, let me know. And I'll usually call them every other year to ask them if they've ever heard from the buyer.
Right.
They hadn't, so.
Okay, but there's a lot more history to this car than just Al Capone's.
Oh, my God, yeah. That was the car Roosevelt rode in to declare war on Japan because they didn't have a presidential limo. The limit for a vehicle was $600. So they already had this out of Capone's inventory in
because they confiscated.
Because they got all the Capone stuff. So they went and got that because it was armored. And, it's so crazy. Back then, the Secret Service and a whole lot of other people thought there was a Japanese person in every tree with a rifle ready to kill all of us, when actually nothing could be further from the truth. And so that was the FDR's limo for a minute. And but it was the car that he rode to Congress to declare war on Japan.
Wow.
Crazy. Yeah, totally crazy. It's an interesting picture over down there of Al and Sonny, Albert Capone, in Happy Hollow, which was an amusement park down there, down from the Arlington on Fountain Street, where actually Frank James Shooting Arcade was down there. It was another amusement park, and you see a lot of pictures with Al and a lot of his friends in front of this big display that says Saloon.
Okay.
And there's millions of pictures taken there in Happy Hollow. And normally, the guy that owned Happy Hollow, Mr. McLeod, would ask people to take their shoes off. And so a lot of historians say that's what started the legend that anyone from Arkansas was barefooted. Because there were so many postcards and pictures sent around the world of a bunch of barefooted people in Hot Springs. So, anyway, nothing could be further than the truth, because the Ziegfeld Follies probably started here. Flo Ziegfeld was here at the Opera House and saw a group of ladies in a folly situation. We had opera here. It was just so many different cultures happening in Hot Springs at the same time, because there were so many people here from around the world that had different entertainment ideas, basically. And of course, you had,
kind of like what
millions of
Vegas
dollars
is now.
worth of, prostitution and gambling. And so there's an old saying here that Hot Springs had something for the man who had everything until they invented penicillin.
Oh, okay. Now, this picture on the wall is Al Capone's cell in...
After the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, he hid out in the Eastern State Penitentiary. He got picked up for a gun violation and spent 9 months there. But as you can see, he was fairly comfortable. And that's still there. You can take a tour and go to...
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Now, in this picture, he's got a radio, he's got a lamp, he's got pictures on the wall, he's got a bed, a desk.
Yeah.
But it doesn't look like a normal penitentiary cell.
He was okay. He
And your guide said that he even got to take off quite often and go have dinner with the warden.
Right, yeah. That's a big haunted museum now in eastern Philadelphia. Eastern State Penitentiary.
Then as we leave this gallery, we come into...
Well, one of the big attractions for these guys and everyone else was Major League Baseball spring training that started here. There were 14 teams originally. The New York...
And they all came here?
They all came here. This is where it started. We have a baseball trail, these big signs that are out that you can put a phone up to and get a little history. And of course, there's history written on those plaques around the city. There's 27 of them. And these are 100 of the Hall of Famers who practiced here every spring. These are Hall of Famers who came from Arkansas. And you know, it's just Honus Wagner had a school here for Major League Baseball players.
Okay.
With a guy named Ray Doan to try to tell them how to spend their $5 a month that they were making professionally. And, you know, this is the 1918 team that won what, I'd say a World Series because, you know, there were only 14 teams. But it was Honus Wagner's team, and there was two fields here basically. We had the field over by the Alligator Farm. Alligator Farm is the oldest attraction, I guess you call it an attraction, in Arkansas. It was the first attraction ever here.
Okay.
Arkansas Alligator Farm. And the Pittsburgh Pirates, this is back when Pittsburgh didn't have an H. You know, originally it was just Pittsburgh, ended with a G.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, I did not know that.
The guy I bought these glass slides from sent me a pen, a lapel pen, that had Pittsburgh written on it. And I called him, I said, did you make these? He said, no, man, Pittsburgh didn't have an H on it back then. He said people wanted to be fancy, so they started spelling it with an H. I thought, man, how crazy is that? But anyway, these are the little things that, you know, fascinate me.
Yeah, they do me too. Yeah. That's a lot of why I love museums.
That's a picture of the Babe over in front of the country club. After he got through playing, he really wanted to become a filmmaker and a real estate guy. And of course, Madden knew him from New York. And so the Babe spent a lot of time down here, as did all of these players.
And you've got a full-size mannequin?
That came from the old Yankee Stadium. And I bought it from a collector. And there were 3 of those, and it's signed by J. Dowd, who sculptured all of those Babe Ruth. And we redid a field, put a few $1 million in one of the old fields where Ruth played here on Belding Street.
Oh,
and
really?
There's an 8-foot statue of the Babe over there. We just christened it this year.
Wow.
So it's pretty fascinating. But these signs that are around town, you ought to there's one right out front of the Gangster Museum.
We just stopped and read that one. It's talking about how the Major League started coming here because they felt it would detox them and get them ready for detox them from alcohol.
Correct.
And get them ready for the baseball season.
Yeah. Well, it did all of that, but they just get retoxed after the games. And so, you know, it didn't. The detox only lasted during the period of the game. Leo DeRocher got fired 3 times by Branch Rickey because of running with the women and drinking and just carousing, basically. They called it back then. But you know, a lot of these photos are just fascinating to see these guys. Of course, we had Dizzy and Daffy Dean were from here, just up the road, and Brooks Robinson. So we've had our own share of pretty good baseball players. And this sign was from one of the old fields.
Royal Crown Cola.
Yeah.
Scoreboard.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And some of these things were just signs off of the fields, advertising signs that were hung up on the fences of the fields.
Okay.
And
now all these players would come here, 14 teams, and they would all, once again, get along and then be adversaries as soon as they hit the field again.
Yeah, it was just practice, you know. I mean, it was the practice games. But they met here. Of course, the White Sox were here the year of the Black Sox ordeal. And some people have, of course, wondered and tried to trace the whole rigging of that game that World Series back to here, but nobody ever proved anything. And journalistically, there'd be no way to do it. So, but they certainly could have had the idea here. But I mean, there was hundreds and hundreds of baseball, Hall of Fame baseball players here. They just, the Hall of Fame, it wasn't in their mind at that point in time. Drinking, having fun, and playing baseball. And back then, I think baseball was playing. You know, that's what it was, play.
Okay.
And somewhere it lost it when he started making $1 million a day. It was no longer play.
And Babe Ruth holds a world record baseball hit.
Yeah.
Right here in Hot Springs.
Yeah, and Cooperstown has approved that. So 600 feet, 597 or something like that. And the ball landed in the alligator farm. So, and that home plate actually is still there. It's in the parking lot of Weyerhaeuser.
Oh, really?
From the alligator in Whittington Park. So that's where some of these photos are from, the Pirates photos. So, but this was a huge attraction to people from New York who had to go to a gigantic stadium, Yankee Stadium or Ebbets Field, or, you know, to watch their team play. And they could come down here and drink with them, and in the morning go out and watch them for nothing.
Wow.
With a few people, you know,
Right.
just a few of their friends sitting on bleachers within 10 feet of the play. So it's just a whole different atmosphere of spring training that we have today. I've been to spring training out in Arizona when Ken Griffey Jr. was playing, and you do have bleachers there, but still there's a lot of press. There's you know, you might have a couple of reporters from the hometowns of these guys. New York Times was here most of the time in Hot Springs, but it was just a totally different atmosphere because you could mingle with the players at night.
Wow. Yeah.
You know, it's just, you know, just fascinating, really, to me. I hate to use that word a lot, but every time I talk about it, that's.
Well, it's a whole atmosphere that's fascinating. Everything about it.
Yeah.
You know, just okay. So then we come into this room.
This is the Outlaw Gallery.
And as we come in, we walk past a jail cell door with a outlaw in his striped clothes.
Yeah. This these guys, the big time high caliber, Luciano and these guys, the New York and Chicago, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Kansas City, those guys didn't really appreciate these guys being here because they were just not the same caliber.
Kind of petty criminals.
They
versus,
were. I mean, Bonnie and Clyde, I think their biggest take was $1,500 sometimes. Some of these guys were kidnapping, like Alvin Karpis kidnapped the ham brewing magnate, got $250,000, you know.
Right.
So just a whole different breed of criminal. And these guys, if you study the mafia much, normally they would only kill or injure other members of some other rival family, and they had to pretty much do something to deserve that.
Right.
Whereas, you know, outlaws would shoot a guy for 50 cents if they needed 50 cents. They just didn't discriminate on who they were killing. Matter of fact, Clyde shot a constable in Alma, Arkansas, and I don't know that he knew this, but he got 75 cents off of him.
Wow.
And, you know, when Bonnie and Clyde came here, they had already had a car wreck and a chase, and they thought Bonnie was kind of injured and thought the baths might help them. They had just gotten run out of Joplin in a gunfight, and they left here and went to Arcadia, and that was it. That was the last ride. But
we did a podcast at Gippsland at the Bonnie and Clyde Museum, and the way he described Bonnie's health at that time was just horrible.
Yeah.
She was not doing well.
No, she wasn't. I mean, the wreck pretty much took her out, but this, you know, Gippsland pretty much took them both out. But, you know, Frank Nash and Alvin Karpis, you know, Karpis planned a lot of bank robberies from here. He was Dillinger's bank robbery planner. And of course, he was Karpis Barker gang. The head of that, other than Ma being the head of those rough boys. But, you know, you have guys in this gallery like Harvey Bailey, who was really prolific bank robber. Never killed anybody, but robbed banks for $50,000 to $250,000 without killing anybody.
Wow.
And ended up, after his sentence, he was finally captured, and after his sentence, going to work for the government. He married the lady who owned the farm where all of these guys held up in southern Missouri, Safe House, married her, and they just became kind of legitimate citizens, and he worked for the government, helping them solve bank robberies.
Wow.
you know, it's interesting to try to follow the tracks of these guys that didn't get killed. You know, by the time we had the murder, or not the murder, but the killing of Frank Nash in Kansas City, the Union Station massacre, they picked him up here on Central Avenue at the White Front Club, two Oklahoma agents, and a BOI guy, Bureau of Investigation.
Okay.
They were able to not tell anybody what they were doing, get out of town with him, take him to Fort Smith, went through several roadblocks, showed their badge. You know, there wasn't any, of course, high speed anything back then. And they made it all the way to Kansas City in an effort to get him back to Leavenworth, where he had escaped from. And Pretty Boy Floyd and Adam Arquetti and some other guys opened fire on them at the Union Station. A BOI guy was killed, and two other guys from Oklahoma were killed. And it became known as the Kansas City Massacre, and that's pretty interesting. There's plaques up in the train station in Kansas City talking about this. Well, at the end of this, prior to that, most of what we would call the early FBI guys were accountants, like Elliot Ness. And they would try to get, like Capone, went to prison for $3,000 in back taxes. Because nobody really testified against him. It's not, some of it was probably fear, but in Capone's, he fed 250,000 people in his soup kitchens for free in Chicago during,
right.
You know, so it wasn't just fear that kept Capone safe. It's just people liked him in Chicago. So, or some people did. I'm sure some people didn't.
I'm sure.
But in Frank Nash's case, Congress then formed the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and that's when the FBI was born.
Okay.
So they gave them arrest powers and weaponry, and that, Hoover was appointed the head of it, a young guy, Hoover. They started training them, taught them how to shoot, and right out of the box, he started these kind of hit squads.
Right.
That took Pretty Boy Floyd and Babyface Nelson out, and they really figured, and probably in their defense, they would have gotten shot if they hadn't shot them first. So
right.
Dillinger was a little bit of a different story.
Now you've got a Dillinger display here.
Right.
With a very interesting piece.
That's one of the 3 death masks still remaining. There's one in the Crime and Punishment Museum, and Bill Helmer, a really famous author, gave that to us, and he still has one, and the Crime and Punishment Museum in D.C. has one.
Okay, now a death mask, for anybody that doesn't know, is a plaster of Paris face molding. They would take and take a wax maybe,
right,
and put it over the face, and then they would put plaster of Paris on the inside so that you knew exactly what they looked like.
And then they were sent to several big cities so that they could make a mask out of it and put it on young people who were in trouble for something.
Uh-huh.
And let them look in the mirror and say, here's how you're going to end up. You're going to
Really?
have one of these. So it was an idea of the FBI to scare people straight.
That's kind of an interesting concept.
Yeah. Now this particular one, when I got this, it had an eyebrow in it, and it was, obviously was because Bill Helmer's great aunt was the pathologist there in that picture, who did the autopsy on Dillinger. So he asked me if I wanted the eyebrow. And I said, well, I'm not planning on cloning him. So
Right.
it was $10,000. So that was 20 years ago.
Wow.
But Dillinger was a great baseball player.
Really?
He actually got moved to a prison to play on a better baseball team.
Now, was he on any of the major leagues?
No. He just, came here to play baseball with some of the best baseball players in the world. And of course, he wanted to work for Madden, but Madden wouldn't have it. There was just too much heat around bank robbers. And one thing about the mob wanted to stay as far away from the federal government as they possibly could,
Right.
Especially after they got a little muscle with the Frank Nash massacre. But yeah, there's a lot to look at in here. This was donated by the family of the world famous latent print examiner who was from Little Rock. This is a thing he put together to show what these guys would do to their fingerprints to try to keep from getting nailed by the FBI and the police on fingerprints. And some of them are pretty fantastic. One fellow, I think it's Roscoe Bush, had a doctor sew his hands to his side one at a time, and when he removed them, he'd have skin from his side, but it didn't matter because they had palm prints.
Well, I was going to say, once you have fingerprints that don't have fingerprints,
then you're pretty easy to find.
Yeah, they don't have to go through any of the scroll work stuff. Yeah. They just find nothing.
Right.
I guess it was the days before latex gloves. Huh?
Oh yeah, there wasn't any such thing as latex.
Wow.
Yeah. Pretty interesting. I'm waiting on that tour to get out of that gallery over there. So.
Right. Yeah, this whole museum is just fascinating, and the things that you have in here as far as your artifacts and your displays. When we go, but if we jump back to the Capone, I didn't bring up any of the prescriptions that you have on the wall for the alcohol. You've got 3 different prescriptions. I'd never seen actual alcohol prescriptions.
And interestingly enough, doctors and pharmacists became really famous during Prohibition.
I'm sure they
and
did.
Real popular.
It's kind of like the medical marijuana people.
Exactly. It's exactly the same.
Right.
And I tell people that have these prescriptions, I said, well, you could always get whiskey during Prohibition. They said, no, I don't believe that. I said, well, come to the museum. I'll show you a prescription. I've got a bunch of them. And it's just something I didn't know either until I started really researching Prohibition itself. So it's
that's an interesting point in time too. The Prohibition. We went to the Prohibition
made millionaires out of a lot of people
in Savannah, Georgia, and that was a real eye opener as far as what all was going on there and who was making the money and who was a lot of backhand deals going on.
It was all backhand deals from the federal government down.
Right.
So at least in Hot Springs, everybody knew who was making money, and they didn't really care. We didn't care if the government made money off of it, because, as long as we did.
Right.
There's a lot of stories written about Hot Springs. I think I said in my book there are millions of pages of readable stories about Hot Springs on the internet. And I got approached by an Associated Press guy and said, how can you say that? And I said, well, Google it. I said, I Google it. It was like 1.6 million
pages.
Yeah.
Wow.
For Hot Springs, Arkansas. So, it's not that we're doing it.
Right.
It's just this has been around for so long, it's just kind of undiscovered. And when gambling closed in '67, when Rockefeller closed it down.
Let's talk about that. That's going to be our next gallery anyway.
Yeah.
And you've got a slot machine in there. You've got a roulette table. You've got several one-armed bandits.
Yeah.
And you've got one-armed bandit in particular that was extremely interesting. Talk about that a little bit and how you acquired that.
Well, when I got here, you know, we have a lot of lake homes here.
Okay.
And Lake Hamilton, which is below the chain of 3 lakes, and it's a 26-mile long lake. So you can build on Lake Hamilton. So there are a lot of, I mean, Clinton's had a house there, Barbara Streisand's had a house there before. I mean, there's a lot of mansions out there. And I had known some people who had lake houses when I was growing up, and we'd come over here and they'd have slot machines in their house, and I just never really understood that. And when I got over here and started doing this, I thought, I've got to have some of these machines. And you know, people weren't really selling them. I don't know why, but you know, I put an ad in the paper, and people started. The internet was around back then in 2007, so I just started putting stuff out, feelers out there that, you know, I'd be interested in purchasing some stuff from the old clubs. And man, my phone blew up, and people started offering me stuff.
Really?
And this came from the Ohio Club. This came from the Southern Club. Even back in the Madden Gallery, there's a 1964 bottle of champagne, New Year's Eve champagne, unopened, from the Southern Club. It says the Southern Club on it.
Wow.
And somebody had just saved it, and that was donated by a fellow named Jim Garrett. And not only just selling me stuff, just wanting to add to the history, because nobody had talked about it. It was just gone. I mean, there's legends and stuff, but that's, you know, it just wasn't cool, you know, what I'd heard. And so when I started researching it journalistically, the truth was a lot more interesting than all of the stories and the legends. But
isn't that amazing?
Yeah, because, you know, when I started interviewing former FBI guys who had been FBI here for 26 years during what they call the glory days here, and the people who were really involved in it, like you were talking about earlier, when I started interviewing them, I go, man, this is a real thing. This isn't. These guys aren't lying about this. It's like the Cooperstown on the end of that video there. He said, you don't have to manufacture history here. This is history.
Right.
And so that's kind of what made it exciting, and sometimes gives me chill bumps to even talk about, because I was just so passionate about it. I still am, about telling the history of Hot Springs. So hopefully the documentary will really broadcast it around the world. We sell a lot of books in Japan just because of the word Capone being on the book.
Oh, really?
Good, yeah, very big on the Capone. And but to come here and experience and hear it straight from guys who lived through it. Almost everyone on my videos has passed away now.
But you got them before they died.
I did.
And he's got them on all of these videos that we watch in every gallery. He's got the short video, and these guys are talking their true stories.
And they tell their own story. They tell the story. And so I don't have to really make anything up about this place. I mean, and it's all in the New York Times or the Chicago Tribune or the Miami Herald. I mean, you can go to all these other newspapers and find out about this through archives and digging. I have 1,000 FBI files.
Wow.
Which you can just purchase from the FBI if it's not classified. And this history is so old that, you know, I think there was one page out of Madden's period of time that was not public, still held in the Warren Commission. But, you know, it's really believable when you hear believable people tell the story.
Right.
And it may not be as, you know, titillating as Hollywood would want it, but it's the real story. It's the real truth of the story, which is what I wanted when we started this deal out.
The thing is, that's the real history. What Hollywood
Yeah,
has
that's
to
right.
say
Yeah.
just warps history and puts that much more confusion
Yeah.
into it.
So we have a saying here: when you get out of this room, these guys aren't quite the caliber of criminal as you get into over here. This is what we call the New York connection.
Okay.
And first walking in here, this is our newspaper, still in business, Sentinel Record. Albert Anastasia, as I had one tour guide who just passed away a few weeks ago. His funeral is April 5th, Mark Palmer. He'd look at this picture when he's giving a tour and go, Albert Anastasia, uh-oh. Because he killed 67 people for murder. He was the head of Murder, Inc.
Okay.
Luciano and Costello and those guys. But he wanted to move here. And he flew here to see if he could find a place and move here, and made the front page of the newspaper. And of course, the chief of police and those guys wouldn't let him. But this is so crazy is that they wouldn't let him move here in the 60s, but they invited Frank Costello to come down and run the gambling. And that letter, his refusal letter, or his turn down, was in the Arkansas Gazette. And he was real nice about it, said, I love visiting, but I'm retired. This is after he got out of the mafia, so to speak. I love visiting here. I'll always keep coming to Hot Springs. I have interest in a hotel there, but I don't want to run anything anymore.
And that's published in the newspaper.
Yeah, in
so
the
it's
Arkansas
like so it's
Gazette
like this
newspaper.
is the most openly kept secret there ever was.
Oh yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Wow.
This to me is a pretty interesting piece here, because this is Luciano's arrest document, and above it is a fellow named Milton Atwater, who was arrested for killing a fellow. A black guy was arrested for killing some other black guys, I think, who were trying to beat him up or trying to kill him. But his son is Ed Atwater, who's on this video presentation, who became the bell captain of the Arlington.
Okay.
So Ed was a little kid working at the Arlington when Luciano was there, and that's how he was able to meet and interact with Luciano. And Luciano came here every year, so he'd always look for Ed, big tipper. And he met him by knowing his father in the county jail here. So
Wow.
and a guy from the Netherlands sent me this picture. That is his actual arrest picture. It's dated down there, 4/1/36, April Fool's Day.
Wow.
It's crazy, isn't it?
It is.
And of course, Siegel and Lansky and Dutch Schultz, Costello, all these guys came here. Mickey Cohen wrote about it in his book. He loved the spaghetti in the Arlington dining room, and a lot of these guys wrote their own biographies and autobiographies. So they would write about Hot Springs, but nobody really ever just picked up on it. It was such a small place,
Right.
and they didn't really talk about it that much because they didn't want everybody flocking down here. It was just kind of their own little private playground.
The resort.
Yeah, it was just their own little private resort. It's like we have resorts today that we'd like to go to.
Right.
So,
And now a lot of these pictures that you have a picture of your gangster or mobster or whoever.
yeah,
And then you have newspaper articles talking about their arrest or their death or their birth or whatever it happens to be. And so this is really interactive from seeing the picture and being able to read the actual news articles, like what you were talking about, with this being a very well documented
oh yeah,
place.
A lot of newspaper men were here, and they were great. Back then, there wasn't much opinion in newspapers. There wasn't a lot of editorial. It was factual.
A little bit different than today.
Today, yeah, it would.
Everything's opinion today.
Yeah,
And then
that's
when you're through
exactly.
hearing their opinion, then you get to hear the opinion of the other 5 that are sitting on the panel.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just I'll tell people, I said, well, it's kind of always been like that, I guess. 12 people heard one guy, Jesus Christ, and they all had a different opinion about what exactly he said.
Exactly.
So, maybe it's always been like that. We just didn't know it. I don't know, but yeah, this is good history here because it's all about the Arlington really in here. And of course, Frank Costello is another one that made the front of Time magazine along with Capone. They just looked like corporate geniuses, and they'd always, when they looked like that, and Madden would tell them not to get out in the open like that because somebody's going to start looking into your business, and they did, and they'd get them for the income tax evasion. If you make that much money, where's your taxes?
Right.
So, and it wasn't so much again that people were scared to testify against them. It's just they liked them. Nobody here would have ever testified against them because they didn't do anything.
Right.
They were just regular people.
Now, the thing that's really cool about this room, were you going to talk about this right here first?
Yeah. No, that's okay. We can talk about.
Go ahead.
We can't really tell folks how you get out of this room.
That's what I was just going to say. You come into this room and you've got 4 walls, you've got a little hallway coming in, and you're going, okay, so is this the end of the tour? And we turn around and walk all the way back out?
But anyway, these machines, Madden's idea, back to Oni Madden, was that the city had to make money off of this if it was going to keep working properly. So the city came up with an amusement tax. So this is actually a license to operate an illegal business.
Oh.
And large casinos paid a little heavier tariff, small casinos, and it was just a city tax. And these are 200 of the people that paid it, but these aren't the big clubs like the Southern and Belvedere and the Tower Club, the White Front. Those aren't on this list. So heaven knows what they paid, because they were some of the 10 most popular casinos. But as long as everybody paid that, then you never had a water leak in front of your door where they had to dig up the sidewalk. Your gas didn't have a main break somewhere, so you didn't have any heat.
Right.
So everything worked fine as long as you paid your tax.
There it is again. Everybody's making their little share.
As long as everybody makes a little, just keep it going. But this picture here was taken. This is an actual FBI picture. This is Belvedere during the illegal gambling. This is Belvedere Casino. It was a big, huge place. I owned Belvedere Country Club at one time. And as you see, everybody is enjoying the casino. They had a great restaurant. That chandelier came out of the foyer. It was an elegant place. And one thing about the difference back then is people dressed really nice.
Always.
It was you didn't have to have an occasion to wear a tuxedo.
Right.
It was just everybody dressed nice.
I've often laughed at that. You get an old Popular Mechanics magazine from the 1950s, 1940s, and you see a guy standing at a lathe wearing a necktie.
Yeah.
And you're going, how much more dangerous can you get than dressing up in a necktie to go to work in a machine shop?
Now, when gambling closed here, and that's what this presentation is about here, Winthrop Rockefeller was elected governor.
Okay, now how does he tie into the Rockefellers?
He was the youngest son
of
John D. Rockefeller.
John D. Okay.
Nelson Rockefeller was his older brother. David Rockefeller was his brother.
Okay.
And John D. Jr. was his brother. He didn't need the money.
Right.
Obviously. He moved to Arkansas, opened up Pettigene Mountain. There's a big car museum up there now. He's gone, of course. His great grandson's still in Arkansas, and all really good people. So he had promised some folks, mostly Nelson Rockefeller, who was running for president in 1968. And Nelson needed Las Vegas. He needed their money and he needed their help. He ended up after Hot Springs, after Winthrop closed down gambling here. They never arrested anybody and, destroyed a few machines, just make a public thing out of it. But Nelson lost the primary. So really did it for nothing. But he satisfied his promise to the folks that really wanted Hot Springs to kind of stop doing this. And some of the children of the club owners told me that really they were about ready. It had been going for a long time,
Right.
And things were, Bobby Kennedy, Attorney General, had passed a Telecommunications Act, which prohibited wiring, the wire service, and bookies and betting and all of this stuff. So it became a bigger against the law than just state now. So these guys packed up and went to Istanbul, Turkey, and bought a palace and opened up Casino de Istanbul, and it operated till 1975.
Oh, really?
It's still there, but it's under Turkish rule now.
Okay.
So they weren't quite done with it. They flew a Constellation prop airliner from here with 60 people on it over to Istanbul, and they had another one sitting here ready, and every 60 days they'd rotate shifts, and it was all of our best dealers, the ones that didn't go to Vegas, and our pit bosses, and that went on till 75. One of the investors was a Greek, and Greece and Turkey got into a spat, and they were afraid that Turkey would nationalize their money. In other words, take all their money.
Right.
So they would regularly fly every other month. They would fly barrels of hundreds, thousands of dollars on the plane with the crews and bring it back. And by 1975, they were able to actually wire a lot of their money that week to Holiday Casino in Las Vegas. So, they basically just said, okay, well, we're done here, but we'll try this over here in Turkey for a while.
Right.
And that was 67 to 75, though. That's a pretty good run, 8 years of it. And then it just kind of came to a halt. But the money, according to the head of this state police, they never took any money. So there were millions of dollars in these counting rooms that was the owners of the club's money in 1967. So, still around.
Wow.
It's not buried. You can see it all around you.
Right. Yeah. Yep. And in here you have a craps table. You've got a roulette table.
Yeah.
And
this is a great wheel here. This is a 40-inch wheel, and they stopped making them in the late 30s, early 40s. Of course, I don't know how they would last forever. This one, of course, is that old, and it's still in perfect shape. We have casino nights here where they play money and have the best time you can think of.
It's still set up so you can play it when you come in here. I don't know about play it. You can run the table. Yeah. We have the Civitans Club comes in here. Some of them grew up dealing cards, and so they run the gaming tables, and it's all for a charity or something. We don't play with real money. I leave that to Oaklawn. We do have a real full-blown casino here. Okay.
That you guys need to visit. Right down Central Avenue here, and but it's just a lot of fun for people, and the Civitans are good about teaching people how to play these games because they've got these same tables out at Oaklawn now.
Okay.
So, I probably could hold a gambling school here of teaching normal people how to gamble.
Right.
To hear them talk about it, there are better ways to make a living for sure. But there's also a good and a not so good way to wager on these machines and these tables. So anyway, we got a blackjack table, craps table, and a roulette wheel in here.
And you've got a one-armed bandit you can pull the handle on.
Chuck-a-luck, which was Hoyle said was the absolute worst form of gambling. They would take this dice cage.
Okay, we've got a cage that looks like an hourglass. It's probably a
two
foot
dice.
and a half tall. And
Yeah, it's got 2 dice, and you spin it, and you would put your money down on 1 through 6. And if you were lucky enough to hit one of those numbers, you would double your money. If not, of course, they'd just take it off the table. And Hoyle said that the chuck-a-luck is what this was called. Said this was the worst wager you could ever get involved with because the house always wins. So, of course, my experience in Las Vegas is the house always wins anyway.
I was going to say the house always wins.
Yeah, it's and this, of course, this display here is just great stuff donated to us. Bow ties that some of the waitresses used to wear. You know, a lot of the waitresses in the Southern would kind of dress like playmates, and they wear bow ties, and in chips from a lot of the casinos here, which you know are valuable because they were considered illegal. Illegal casinos. But, just bingo cards. Bingo was a big deal here. Almost every place had bingo, kind of like we have Keno now in the big casinos. Back then it was just bingo. So when you leave here, you know, you'll go into our theater, which will take you under the street of Central Avenue, where there are a lot of things to be discovered, and we were lucky enough and fortunate enough 15 years ago to discover some of those things. So we won't go into exactly what that was, but it really augments the entire tour because a lot of people hear about tunnels here, and it's not so much that it's a tunnel as much as it's a creek that had to be covered up because the buildings were washing into the creek. The wooden sidewalks and, you know, back in the Western days. So once they started paving, they had to pave over it kind of wall to wall to just keep it from eroding and the business has fallen off in it. So you can drive a Mack truck underneath Central Avenue. And
it's that big?
It's huge. It's
now in your
in front of the museum here, it's probably 30 feet to the ceiling underneath.
Wow. Okay. It didn't look that big when you were walking through it in your video.
No, that was right up there at the front by Whittington Park.
Okay.
And all of the flooring the concrete flooring is gone.
Okay.
So they had that built up. Now it's all eaten like the Grand Canyon. It just keeps getting deeper. It keeps getting lower because there's water flowing through it constantly. And it goes all the way to Lake Hamilton. So it's about 7.5 miles of creek.
That's amazing.
And, you know, it'll come above ground. It doesn't come above ground, but it's exposed off of Belding Street. You can see it. There's what we call a greenway that the city has built there, which are nice dog parks and you know, nice sidewalks that run beside it. And if you want to get down in it, you can. And it's just for people who've never experienced real nature like that, there's about 4 or 5 miles of running, babbling brooks year round.
Wow.
You know, it doesn't matter how much drought there is because it's coming out of the ground up here.
Right.
So, and out of these 2-3 little mountains that surround the valley. This originally was called Valley Street. So, anyway, we hope people from your listeners will get a chance to come down and visit Hot Springs. A lot of hospitality and it's just a lot of things to do.
There's a lot of things
riding, fishing, skiing, water skiing, that is.
I was going to say, I didn't see any snow.
No, there's no snow. It's water skiing.
What are your winters like? Are your winters pretty mild?
Wasn't bad this year. We had a few below freezing days, but I would call it, we're zone 7 if you're a master gardener. So, you know, we're not quite into the 8s. Louisiana and southern Arkansas is. But it's pretty middle of the road. You know, it was 39 this morning when I woke up, and it's 70 now. So,
right. Really nice.
It's typical spring here. I don't know that we even got snow this year in the winter. We may have had a little bit of frost. We may have gotten some snow. Some parts of Arkansas did, I'm sure. But Hot Springs, because of the hot water, you know, it doesn't stay long, at least on the street,
Right.
because you know there's so much thermal energy below the street. But everybody needs to come down and experience the Arlington. The Vapors, which you see me doing a video in here, it's back open as an event center, so you can go in there and look at the stage where Tony Bennett first rehearsed San Francisco, according to Tony Bennett, is still there.
Wow.
And I've sang on this stage myself several times, and it's just hard to explain unless people see it because everybody sees something a little bit different here.
Right.
It's the crystal capital of the world. That interests a lot of people. We have 2 or 3 big crystal mines here. And I guess just for your listeners, we appreciate you guys coming through, and hope we get to entertain you again someday.
Oh, you will. I think this is a place we're going to come back to. We're kind of headed home on this leg of the trip.
Most people do, even the mob. You know, once they came here, it was a cool enough place that they wanted to come back. So
yes. So I appreciate you taking your time today,
Loren.
Robert.
Guys.
This has been such a honor and such a cool place to visit. The area, the museum, talking with you has all been great. And I always finish out my podcast by saying the world is full of wonder.
It is.
This place is a wondrous place. People need to get here, need to come out and explore, and everybody have an absolutely wonder-filled day.
Amen.
All the roll and go, where am I to go? Meet Johnny, where am I to go? For I'm a young and a sailor lad, and where am I to go?